Guys, good to see you. All right, so let's see here. Let's go to share screen. I'm going to do a little video here on source citation. You guys, so currently, you guys are or should be reading about source citation, and you're going to have this upcoming plagiarism activity. So let's see here. Okay, now in your in modules course materials, you're going to see this source citation mindfulness lecture notes. So I'll be referring to this. To avoid plagiarism, plagiarism is where you are using a source, but you're not crediting it properly. And of course, the way around that would be to cite your source properly. So a couple of questions that you have to ask are what I've presented here. Just always, the bottom line is, would you have thought of, whatever details or ideas or just the way something is worded had you not consulted a source? So if the answer, in this case, like here, if you're lifting a lot of direct words, you got to cite. And now content wise, you might be taking source content like ideas and maybe putting it more in your own words, but still the idea came from somewhere. And now, of course, there are ideas that you analytically create yourself. There's also what we call, so that would be called original thought. Then there's also common knowledge. So if it falls into these categories, you don't need to cite. However, if it's from anything else, then you would need to cite. Now, to cite properly, what I've done is I bulleted several key components that are really kind of based around what I notice about students, like where they mess up. Okay, so your in-text citations, whenever your instructor refers to what's called in-text citations, parenthetical references, which I've used that term here, that's all referring to just citing within the actual body of the essay, within the discussion. And then, of course, at the end, on a separate page, always remember that you should do a page break and then create your works cited page, which is the list of the sources that you have cited. And also do note that for an English class, we use MLA, or at least in this class we're using MLA. Once you learn one format, then learning other formats is not that difficult. You got your APA, you've got your Chicago style manual that tends to use a lot of like footnote type stuff, but that's not MLA. So MLA, you have these qualities. One thing to watch out for, guys, is don't flip-flop between, say, MLA and APA. Like, say, for example, when you have citation where you're putting within the essay, you're putting the year in parentheses, that's more APA, like within the essay. That's not MLA. So yeah, just kind of be careful with that. You can always ask me, and I will certainly point out to you that, all right, you're kind of flip-flopping between one format and the other. So just maintain one, through and through. All right. So within text citations, you have these kinds of elements. I'll show you some examples of that. Yeah, so just, I'm not going to read everything. I mean, you can read it yourself, but I'll show you how that works, visually with some of the examples. And then, of course, your works cited page. These are elements that you want to be mindful of as well. Definitely make sure to alphabetize it, alphabetical order. Now, if you don't have an author's name, if it's unauthored, then you'd go by the title of the work, list it that way. Again, I'll show you examples of this. And make sure you have that hanging indent, and and also just the title mechanics, quotes around smaller titles, such as these, italics around larger, what we call container titles, which are these kinds of titles. And if it's an online source, you should put the URL. That usually goes at the very end of whatever works cited entry. All right. First of all, let's take a look actually at some examples of, well, first of all, plagiarism and then in-text citation. This is another item that I have made available to you. It's a documenting sources pamphlet that we used to use a lot. So this paragraph right here is from this author, Alvin Toffler, okay? And it's from a book. It's called Future Shock. Now, larger container titles like a book, you could also underline that as well. It's the same thing as italicizing, but I would just encourage you just use italics. I think if you start using underlining, see, because you don't want to flip-flop between underlining and italics, just use one or the other. But so Toffler is talking about like craftsmanship, like when you're crafting a product. And in the past, his argument is that there was a lot more attention paid to a product that lasted, whereas in contemporary times, like just think, your laptop, like the things that kind of bind it might break down, the brackets, your phone. And so stuff like that, you might have to just get after a short amount of time, so they don't last as long. So anyway, so he has his train of thought regarding that, how things were built to last. And then you have this hypothetical student, Joe, where he's using the Alvin Toffler source, but first of all, he never mentions Alvin Toffler, right? You also don't have what you call the parenthetical, like citation of page number. Now, do note that when in the parenthetical reference, if you don't have page numbering, guys, a lot of you may encounter that with your online sources, then use this abbreviation. Just make sure it looks like that. Okay, don't like capitalize the N or spell out NO, or just that's the abbreviation, all right? N period, PAG. So that means no page numbering, no pagination. Let's see here. Okay, so in this case, yeah, you don't see any of that. So that right there is a problem. Now, another thing is look at the lifting, right? See this is Alvin Toffler, the published writer, his sentence, and then look at Joe's. He's just kind of flipped words around, right? Yeah, you see? And then here, he just basically repeats the first sentence, but drops the L. So this is still word for word copying. Here, he's kind of trying to paraphrase, meaning rephrasing it, putting it in your own words. He's just not doing a good enough job. Yeah, and then see, like, man built to life. See all this? Yeah, like, see this from the original? Man, he's just word for word copying, right? So you get the point. I mean, this would really be F-worthy, where it's like, hey, you're not citing the author at all. You're lifting word for word in. Also, lifting word for word, sometimes there are certain ideas that you really can only express using a certain amount of words. So there may be limitations in how diverse your word choices can be. There's only so many ways maybe to express maybe a certain idea. However, by and large, so what we as instructors look for is maybe if words are being lifted, but if they're more common, that's one thing. But if they're very idiosyncratic with the voice of the writer, as far as his word choices, his sentence structuring, transitioning, then it's like, yeah, this is no, this would be F-worthy, or at the very least D-worthy. Okay, so how could Joe have avoided this? Now, if you continue on, okay, so the most common way of citation is direct quoting, right? Now, you could do a long quote, all right, which I would say use this very sparingly. You don't want to over rely. So this is what you call a quote island, right? So usually with a quote island, a long quote, you want to have a setup, a lead in. I mean, all quotes you want to have a setup or lead in, but so here you have a quote setup or lead in, he uses like an independent clause. Notice also here he has signal phrasing. Okay. So signal phrasing is when you say like, according to so-and-so, so-and-so points out, so-and-so offers. Try to avoid using boring verbs like talks about, says, said. No, say like, yeah, examines, argues, offers, illustrates, according to so-and-so. But yeah, so here, essentially it's what you call an independent clause, right? Subject, verb, and then the predicate portion of the sentence, the object of the verb. And it's expressing a complete thought. Then you have the colon. See, guys, a lot of students, I notice like they will have their own kind of sentence lead in, and then they'll have the quote, but they'll put a period here, or they'll put a comma. Those are incorrect. I mean, if you have an independent clause preceding it, a complete thought, you should use a colon, the 2 dots, right? Okay, so we got the setup, got the colon. See, colons introduce things. It's like saying, for example, such as, okay, and then he's got, now, when do you use a quote island? Where you offset it, right? You tab each line. And also just single space it, guys, so it doesn't take up so much space on the page. But if it's 4 or more lines, okay, which this is, then you'd want to offset it, all right? So just try to remember to do that. Don't have like these long quotes and then you're just not offsetting it. Offset it now also, this does not count towards your page length, okay? So if a student was supposed to turn in a 3-page paper and they turn in it's just 3 pages, but they have this long quote island, then it's like, okay, you have 2 3/4, right? You don't have 3 pages. So those are just things to remember. Okay, getting back to citation formatting, when you have a long offset quote, you don't need to put it in quotation marks because it is understood when you offset it that, oh, this is a lift, okay? Now, if you surround it in quotes, that's not a major error. It's not like, D, I mean, at least I wouldn't do that. It's just unnecessary, okay? But just remember, that's only for long quotes that you've offset like this. And then notice also it's framed, right? You've got the parenthetical reference where you cite the page number. See, the student doesn't have to put Toffler here because the student has mentioned it here, so it's already understood that, oh yeah, that's from Toffler, okay? And then, just always remember, guys, that the period will go on the outside. Now, having said that, I notice with current MLA, like MLA 8, or we might be on MLA 9 now, but I noticed in the example that they give in your book of a long quote, the period is actually put on the inside. And I don't know why they changed it. I hate when they do that, where it's like, don't give students more variables, they'll just screw it up. But in this case, I believe the reason why they did that is just because it's like, oh, well, you're not using quotation marks, so yeah, just put it on the inside. Because that's what you usually do. However, yeah, I would say that if you just want to be consistent, then just keep the period on the outside. When you're citing, you have the parenthetical and you're fine. See, typically, like with shorter quotes, see the rule, ordinarily the rule is that when you have quotation marks, the ending punctuation, whether that's a period, a comma, maybe semicolon, that's going to go on the inside. That's ordinarily the rule. However, that rule changes when you have a parenthetical citation like this, okay? So now it goes on the outside. So just try to commit that to memory, guys. Don't like put it on the inside where I have to like exit out. It's like, no, this is wrong. We went over this. All right. So yeah, so just remember that. But notice, guys, with the short quote, again, a signal phrase is used. And then essentially the words of the student writer lead into the words of the quote. Okay, now mechanically, the student should put a comma there because you do have a transition, and then you got like a main clause. So grammatically, there should be a comma there. But yeah, so then you have all that. Now, one thing you'll notice with this is there's the ellipses, the dot, dot, dot that's used. Whenever you do that, you're excluding information. Maybe you feel like the passage is too bulky and you just want to capture certain essential words, because that's the deal with a quote. When you're quoting, you are drawing attention to the language of the author, and that's why you're quoting. I would say, like, if you feel that when you're writing your essays that your own voice as a writer is being drowned out by too much quoting like this, then all right, no problem, paraphrase. Okay, so here's like an example of a paraphrase. But yeah, anyway, just to get back to this, you got your ellipses, but that's where you're removing information. Now, do note, guys, that when you have to make a change, okay, within the quote itself, okay, within the quote itself, you use the brackets like you see here. Yeah, they also mentioned this phrase sic, which means Latin for thus. That's if you notice an error that the original writer is making. So they give an example, like former President Nixon, he resigned in 1974, not 84. So like, say a student hypothetically is quoting a source, but the source got the year wrong. So if you do that, sic in brackets, that means you're covering your tracks. Well, I didn't make this error. The published writer made the error. Although I would note that if you're consulting a source that's getting that kind of information wrong, don't use that source because you have to wonder about the credibility of that source. It's a little bit sloppy there. It's a little sloppy. Here's another example where what the student decided to do was, instead of putting the sic, the student decided to actually just put the correct year. And obviously you're inserting something within a quote. So 1974. Notice also here, see in the original quote, it just had the pronoun he. Perhaps the student wants to reclarify who he is, so they insert in brackets Richard Nixon. All right. But yeah, so that's using brackets and ellipses. These are all mechanical things, right? Okay, now, if you remember the original paragraph, talking about craftsmanship, see that it's ideal, handcrafting, creative and productive, and he had to be that way. And essentially that, the artisan is holding himself or herself to very high standards, and then just talking about how long it might last using an example like boots. Now, you see in the paraphrase, so again, unlike what we saw originally with the F-worthy plagiarism, the student now is using a signal phrase to cite and then framing it. And yeah, if you compare, yeah, see, you notice how the original began with like permanence is the ideal, or in the past permanence was the idea. You don't see any of that, but see producing things that would endure. So that's a nice rephrasing. Okay, it's the same idea, but now it's more the student's own voice as a writer. So just always remember that. My advice to you, if you tend to be like when you're trying to paraphrase or like say summarize, where you're also trying to rephrase, if you tend to just change one or two words, my advice would be read the original sentence, or however, and you can paraphrase one sentence, it could be a whole paragraph, like train of thought like is being done here. But in this case, what you want to do is read it, put it to the side. What do you remember about that sentence? Articulate that. I really feel like if you do that, then you'll probably not just do a rinky dink changing one or two words. And also you want to change the structure of the sentence as well. Okay, not try to match the structure of the original. With the plagiarism activity that we're going to have, there's one sentence that I'll direct your attention to if you guys, especially if you don't catch it, that it's a good example where the writer's rephrasing the original wording in the original source, but it just sounds too similar because the style of the sentence is it's copying the style. So there could be the word for word kind of stuff, and there could be like stylistic plagiarism as well. But yeah, this is a good rephrasing. Okay. But yeah, just remember, guys, when you're paraphrasing, as is being done here, or when you're summarizing, right, as is being done here, you still have to cite, right? Like with the summary, you still see the citation. You got the signal phrase or speech tag, and then you have the parenthetical reference. Okay, same thing here. And then notice also, again, remember, guys, just remember, period goes on the outside. The ending or whatever ending punctuation, it goes on the outside. Sometimes maybe you might have a pattern where you have citation and in the first half of the sentence, but then in the second half, like say you transition out of that and the sentence hasn't ended, but you're offering a response. So that way your citation ends in the middle. So you'd want to frame it in the middle. Again, these kind of things come up in the plagiarism activities, so we'll certainly like go over that. But the difference between paraphrasing and summarizing is where you're trying to condense, right? Trying to get the essence of what's being talked about without all of the details, all right? Whereas in paraphrasing, you're trying to match the density, the length and the detail of the original. Whereas summaries you're just summing up. Now, of course, summaries can be longer than just this. Like maybe what if you're summarizing a whole book, and that might extend over several paragraphs or, whatever. So there could be that, but it's just you're taking something that is longer and, you're just reducing it to the essentials. Okay. But so that's the difference between the two, but they're both similar in that you are putting it in your own words, and so you don't need to use quotation marks. Okay. Now, okay, so the works cited, right? Now, technically, the works cited, it actually should be more flush with the left, like so. Excuse me. But that's more or less how it looks. I mean, I think this pamphlet, it's using MLA 7, which I believe the only difference that like say with MLA 8 or MLA 9 is they just dropped the requirement of referring to the city. Now, of course, if you have that, that's fine. It's not like a big error. But yeah, so this is your typical book, right? Got the name flipped, you got that. Now, of course, as I'm telling you guys, let's just use italics, all right? And then, if you're going to include the city, it's going to look like that, : publishing company, year. But you really could just delete, that. So it just looks like that. But see, the relationship there should be a logical relationship between how you're listing it and how it's being cited within the essay. See, so like say, for example, if I put as Random House notes or as Future Shock notes, so then I'm like, oh, okay, there wasn't an author, so I'm looking for Future Shock or Random House under F or R, but that's not correct because it's like, oh, well, you do have an author. That's how you've cited it. So just make sure, and this is something that I point out here, listing matchup, right? See, I got all bases covered, ladies and gentlemen, that it should match up with how you're listing it on the works cited. Okay. So again, students that mess these things up, that tells me that they're not retaining what I went over, or just simply rereading. These things are available to you. Just reread the damn thing. All right. Then you wouldn't be making these errors that I have to tag your grade for. Okay, so let's actually take a look at in your Norton. Okay, so this is part of your readings, and you've got the MLA citation chapter, where this is the table of contents. Now, when you're citing a source, I would encourage you to start first with generating the works cited. I would try to avoid using citation generators. I think that those are okay, but sometimes students enter things in the wrong fields, and then they have, oh, here's my work cited. It's like, okay, this is wrong. Like, say, for example, maybe they're supposed to put like the author when they put the editor, or maybe they are supposed to put the book title when they put like the title of the essay. So it's good to just have like a rudimentary knowledge of how things work. So, if you have 2 or more authors, how do you do the works cited? Okay, so let's look at that, 562. See, guys, if you have 2 authors, it should look like that. Notice how the first name you flip and alphabetize it under that first name, and then the second name, you just have it in the regular order, and then you just simply put an and, right? Just put an and. What if you have 3 or more authors? So then what you use is you list the first name and flip it, and then you use the Latin et al. Okay, see that, guys? That means and others in Latin, et al. All right. What if you have 2 or more works by the same author? So what you could do is, say, for example, this guy Kaplan, you're consulting 2 of his sources. I mean, you could just simply repeat Kaplan, comma, Robert D, or you could do the 3 hyphens. Okay. All right, so those are just some examples. Let's see here. All right. Now, what about, and like I said, in class, it's always good to just kind of write things down as well, take notes. So hopefully you guys are doing that, or, just make sure it's stored in your brain and it doesn't get removed. Some of the key sources that you guys will be using, if you want to jot these down, I would say like articles, essays, web pages. So that's on page 563 to 71. You have the works cited templates for those. All right. Websites. Now, if you notice, like say an article in a magazine. All right, let's look at this. See, notice, guys, what they do is the magazine article. So this is what you call a smaller work, right? Smaller work within a larger container, the container being the magazine. So this is in quotes, and then this is italicized. But notice with this magazine, so you got the name flipped, you have the smaller title than the larger title, volume number if known, you got that, you got the issue number if known. These things, if you can't readily find them, that's not as important. But what is important is this, the titles, the date, right? And then PP means pages. So whenever you have a smaller work within a larger work and it's a print source, you should put the page range at the end. Now, a lot of you are dealing with online sources. So the online version would be something like this, okay? So notice how it's pretty much the same thing, author, smaller title, larger title. Notice how the date of publication is like that, where you have the day, then the month. Always aim for abbreviations, guys. And then you got the year, and then you've got the URL. Current MLA, they used to require that you point out the access date, which I guess now they don't require it. I think it always looks good to put like accessed and then whatever date you accessed it, because things in cyberspace can change. But if you don't have a publication date, okay, then for online sources, make damn well sure that you put accessed or retrieved on and then have that, okay? So just remember that, guys. But yeah, so those are your examples of just like online article type stuff. I mean, there are others that you could look at, like you got this here. Yeah, I'm not going to waste too much time with that. Okay, now, what about like you guys, you have that Norton Field Guide, right? So that's a book, but see, the thing is when you're generating a works cited, you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of a source is it? Is it an online article? Is it a page from a website? Is it an anthology? Is it a work in an anthology? So in this case, let's see. Okay, so this Norton book that we have is what you call an anthology. An anthology is a collection of works. So let's see here. Print book. Yeah, these are your like basic entries for a book, and this is if you have an ebook. So a work in an anthology. This is, here's an example. Again, you got your author, you got your smaller work. So notice, like with the magazine article, some of the same principles, right? Smaller work within the larger work. Notice the quotes, the italics. And then you got a comma and then edited by, in this case, we have 3 different editors, starting with Richard Bullock. So you just want to list all of them. Maybe you could put like Richard Bullock et al., if you don't want to list all 3. And then you've got the publishing company, the year, and then the page range that you found that the work is located within, the anthology. All right. So yeah, that's your work in an anthology. Let's see here. Okay, now here's an example where what if you're citing, like say for example, the chapters that you will or have read about source citation in your Norton, see, those are written by the editors. They're not written by anyone else. So that's where you're citing the anthology as a whole, okay? And so that's how it would look. Well, in your case, I mean, it would be Bullock, comma, Richard, and then comma, and then you could put et al, ETAL, have a space between. And then you'd put editors, comma, and editors, and then Norton Field Guide, blah, 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 and then you'd put the publishing company. And also if it's a different, if there are different editions, make sure to put the edition after the title. So like you'd put 5th edition and then publishing company and then the year. Okay. Yeah, see, like notice how here after the book title, they put the edition. So here, if that had an edition, you put that there. Okay. All right. Let's see here. But yeah, so just always refer back to these things, guys. These are really helpful. Okay. Now, lastly, I'd like to show you this sample research paper. Okay. So let's actually take a look at it. Let's look at how the citation matches up. Okay. So one thing, let me just move this out of the way. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. One thing I'd like to point out, guys, is here the formatting is really clean. Notice for MLA, you don't need to have a cover page. For the first page of your essay, all you need to have is in the upper left-hand corner, no more than 4 lines, just have this information. Your name, my name, don't misspell my name. And then the class, the section number, and then the year. Okay. Now, if you want to write this down, so again, that, I mean, you could look at it from the table of contents too, but that is actually, so the table of contents itself is on page 548 to 51 for chapter 54. And then the sample essay starts on page 588, 588 to 96. Okay. But notice this is all clean. You got your double spacing, right? Don't do all this funky extra spacing. Just looks like you're trying to pad out your length. Notice also the use of the headers, right? So I notice sometimes there's some students where they'll put this whole thing, they'll put this on every page. It's like, no, just the first page. And then on each, let's go to each successive page. Yeah, see, like this is the next page. So just have that. Notice you don't have all of that information there. Because again, it just looks like you're trying to pad out your length. But yeah, and then you just you have the page numbers. So yeah, I'd encourage you to make sure to have that. All right, guys. Let's actually go to the works cited. Let's see what that looks like, and then we'll look at a couple of citations and how they match up. So you see the works cited. See, okay, everything's in alphabetical order. You got your hanging indents, right? So just make sure that when you see this is only, that's all on one line. So you don't need to worry about a hanging indent, but this, it's spilling over on two successive lines. So you need to tab the successive line. A lot of students, they screw things up. They tab the first line and then have this flush with the left margin. No, do it this way. Okay. Yeah. So see, just think visually. It's easier to look. It's like a filing cabinet, right? It's like the tabs in a filing cabinet where, you know, you're just looking at all this stuff. Okay. Oh. All right. Yeah, but you know, everything's in alphabetical order. And this, you know, you have a lot of different types of sources. Like this is a book. This is well, an article from a newspaper. Okay. Here you got something that's an online source, right? You got author, smaller work, the larger, I guess, website probably that it comes from, the publisher if known, which is the university. And then you got the URL. And then notice here, they do put the access date. See, this is a good example, guys. Notice how we don't have a publication date. So that's why it becomes very important that you put the access date. Okay, so always remember that, guys. Write that down. Okay, so it seems like we have two sources from Hamby, and then we move on. All right. Now, when you're citing like Hamby, you don't want to just say Hamby. You'd want to clarify, you know, include some of the title to clarify one source to the other. Like, let's see if we could, maybe let's get back to that Hamby. Let's see how that's cited. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, it continues on, but see, notice also here, guys, this is an example where you have a source that doesn't have an author. So that's fine. Just base it around the title. Okay. So I was talking about Hamby. Let's look at how Hamby is cited. So let's remember this, guys. Hamby, and one is Harry S. Truman, blah, blah, blah. One is Man of the People. All right. So let's see. Let's remember that. Hamby, Harry S. Truman, and Man of the People. Hamby. Where do we got Hamby? Let's see here. We call it, oh, right here, guys, right here. Oh, actually, good. Yeah, we got both of them. Look at this. Okay, so the writer has a train of thought where Hamby is being, you don't see quotation marks, so obviously it's more of a paraphrase or a summary. So you don't want to just have Hamby and then 465, right? Because then you wouldn't know what Hamby source it was. So you have this other marker. Notice with titles, you could just include like the first word, just some marker that clarifies, but make sure it's the first word in the title, not like a word that's in the middle where it's like, what? Okay, so Hamby, man. So that was that one source that had man in the title. It started with man. And then here's the other Hamby source. You got Hamby and then Harry S. Truman. Okay. And notice that that's in quotes, whereas this was in italics. So you maintain that, right? But yeah, so that way it's clear that, oh, okay, well, this is the Hamby Harry S. Truman source, the one that starts with that in the title. Okay. And also notice, guys, mechanics, right? See, you got your parenthetical reference, the quote goes after. You've got, it's probably like paraphrasing going on here, but you got parenthetical and then the period goes after. Where's an example of a quote? Let's see. Let's get out of this. Show you an example of a quote. Oh, okay. Actually, let's look at page 1. All right. Okay, so see, notice like here, you got beginning quote, ending quote, space, citation, the parenthetical reference, and a period. Okay. So yeah, so there you have it. That's how yours should look when you have direct quotes. Let's look at some of these listings. So from what I gather, now the student could have really just said Egan, Egan noted instead of a New York Times article, but maybe the student wanted to kind of clarify that Egan's writing for New York Times, so that's okay. But just always remember that if you don't mention what the source is listed under in the sentence, make sure you point that out here. Okay, so let's see, Egan, and then we got photograph. So notice these sources are online sources that are not paginated, right? Okay, so let's remember that. So we got an author, we have something that's unauthored. So Egan and then photograph and then Donaldson, all right? Now notice this, you have what's probably a print source that has page numbering, paginated, okay? So let's remember that, guys. So Egan, photograph, Donaldson, all right? Let's see. Egan, photograph, Donaldson. Egan, photograph, Donaldson. Oh, let's see, Egan, photograph, Donaldson. All right. Okay, yeah, see right here, Egan, right? See, that matches up with how it was cited in the essay. Donaldson matches up, right? And then photograph, right? See guys, that matches up. See, a lot of students screw this up, where like in that parentheses in the parenthetical, some students might put life. Okay, so it's listed under life. I'm looking for L, can't find it. Some students might put Google Books. All right, it's listed under G, Google Books. I'm not finding anything. See, that's because it's listed on photograph. So it's not rocket science, guys. Just make sure the listings match up. All right. Okay, I think that's about it. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the share. I'm gonna stop the recording. Hopefully that was helpful for you, and let's move on to that plagiarism activity. All right, guys, take care of yourselves. Be safe.